Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm podcasting director Chris Mosier, and today's conversation is yet another part of a series with our Democratic lawmakers here in Texas in advance of the 89th legislative session here in the Lone Star State. We want to hear about what's ahead and what's at stake for our state as the second Trump administration begins. And today we're super proud to have on the pod for the first time Senator Nathan Johnson of Dallas. Business attorney and a music composer, too. That's cool. He's served the people of Senate District 16 since 2018, when he became the first Democrat to take that seat in decades, displacing perennial gubernatorial loser Don Huffines in that election in 18. Senator Johnson, we appreciate the time. And let's get right to it. As the session looms, Republicans in Texas are more emboldened than they ever have been, which is clearly saying something with the Trump win. What do you expect in terms of your party's situation in the session overall, and more specifically, the challenges that you expect to face in the Texas Senate this time?
You know, odd as it sounds, in the Texas legislature, I don't think the Democratic situation is a whole lot worse. It is worse than it was, but it's not a whole lot worse. We've been fighting this same stuff for quite a while. It is going to be impossible to stop the regressive policies that I expect to come raining down. You know, the Republicans are all perpetually in a primary contest, one that's controlled by a few big money people, and they're going to have to be pushing stuff that I don't even know how excited some of them are about it.
Right.
The Democratic strategy is going to have to be to look for fissures in the Republican Party, and there are a lot of them. And where you see those fissures, that's where we can be really influential on things that don't just have the full weight of the Republican steamroller behind them. So that sets about the strategy about some of the more divisive, backwards issues that unfortunately occupy a hell of a lot of time in the legislature. But the other place I think Democrats need to work very, very seriously is being key players in a lot of the major things that have to do with state governance, but not so much to do with partisanship. Because I want for the public to trust Democratic competence to run this state, not just be angry and offended. And we are angry, and we've got reasons to be, and we've got reasons to try to defend people's rights. But we also need capable people making sure we have water and electricity, and this one starts to venture back into the politically divisive area, public education.
Right.
Shouldn't be a big partisan thing, but it is, and we can score points there by both saying the right things if it's in a losing effort. But there's a ton of stuff where I am not going to cede to the Republican Party complete control of the operations of a state of 30 million people that runs a $300 billion budget and a $3 trillion economy. So I think, ironically, as we enter into a legislative session where we have seen an even further lurch to the right, we have a very inexperienced legislature. We have the controlling party dominated by some demagoguery and some basically issues that are not really going to build a better future for the state.
Right.
I think it could be an opportunity for Democrats to play an even bigger role, a more important role in the substantive issues of governance, work with the few remaining Republicans who are really serious about governance, and do some good work next session. And I do think it's possible.
That's a terrific answer. Let's dive a little bit, not too deep, but into a few of the various issue areas that are definitely going to come down the pike. As you mentioned, some kind of are more on the distraction front, and others are kind of serious business that might be able to be developed. Starting with reproductive rights here, Republicans appear almost certain to expand their assault on Texas women by further limiting access to abortion, threatening access to life-saving abortion drugs used in miscarriage care. Access to contraceptives is in the conversation. They've even talked about doing away with things like no-fault divorce. So this is not just about reproduction. This is developing into a broader assault on specifically the rights of women, we think. Senator, where do you see all of that stuff headed in this next session?
I have no doubt that a lot of that stuff is going to be advanced. It's an open question whether or not it passes, right? The Republicans are pretty sophisticated about judging when when something's going to work to the benefit and can get their base really riled up, and when they've gone. I hesitate to say. I mean, I'm sorry, Chris. I'm not a pundit. I mean, I'm correcting myself in real time here. What is too far, right?
Yeah.
What is too far? They've banned abortion in Texas, right? Is banning contraception going too far? I think it probably is, and I think it won't get anywhere because, of course, it's too far. Banning abortion is way too far, but even for their own base, that may be too much. So I think we'll see a few more unnecessary, unhelpful, damaging, cruel, backwards bills pass. I don't know whether we'll see the criminalization of a woman who gets an abortion. I don't know whether they will succeed in trying to build a tighter network of laws to persecute and prosecute people who assist women leaving the state. I don't know if they're going to try to outlaw gay marriage, if they're going to try to outlaw contraception. I think there is such a thing as too far. I wish it were closer to sanity than it is, but I think all bets are off, really.
Yeah. It's the old the Overton window conversation. How far can we shove it over to this direction? And perhaps too far is where we start to see some serious economic damage coming out of some of these decisions that they make as well. And so we'll go into that a little further. Actually, with this next question I want to ask, it's absolutely essential to that. Immigration, of course, a huge topic. How do you expect this promised mass deportation operation coming from Trump 2.0? How do you expect that to play out here in Texas? And what advice might you have for Texas families of mixed immigration status? There are thousands of them. And what can progressive people, just everyday citizens, do to help and support people who may find themselves in the crosshairs of all of this?
Okay, Chris, that's a hard one. Let me start with the middle question. What should families of mixed immigration status do? I wish I weren't saying this. I'd say be careful. Don't travel. I would take the threat very, very seriously. I still don't want to believe that Trump will be successful, that Trump and his enablers are going to be successful on the scale that they talk about in their campaign rhetoric. It's just unfathomable and economically devastating, Chris, as you were pointing to, I think, before you laid this question out. There's economic consequences to these kinds of things. And a country like the United States and a state like Texas cannot afford to eliminate such a huge swath of its workforce. Never mind the cultural implications, the humanitarian implications of this. But they're going to do something. And the land is already being contributed by the state of Texas to the federal government for purposes of rounding people up. I would hope that it backfires. I mean, it was one thing for the Republicans to take advantage of what the New York Times acknowledged as the single largest spike in immigration in the history of the United States, more than the heyday of Ellis Island. But I think that is going to run out of steam for them, right? Okay, but there's no more masses of people flowing over. Biden essentially shut down the flow a year and a half ago. So they don't have that same threat of they're all coming for you. Now it's a matter of taking human beings, putting them in a pen, and putting them back into war-torn countries to be prey to gangs. And I think it's not going to have the appeal that they were able to get from just saying we need to close the border, we need to close the border. You had a lot of pretty mainstream people saying, yeah, we need to close the border. It's going to be a whole different thing when they're deporting someone who you work with.
Right. People who live down the street from you. I mean, there are communities and towns in Texas where if they try to do what they say they're going to do on the scale that they say they're going to do it, it's not going to be quiet. It's going to be, vehicles and doors being kicked in, and it's going to be very evident and very graphic, if they do what they say they're going to do. So,
and what can progressives do? I mean, tell the stories. Talk about who is being rounded up and deported. I mean, this isn't someone who came across the border to rob a convenience store. Right. We've got people who've been living in the country for 20 years. And it's a very serious conversation about what an immigration policy should be, about who should be allowed to stay or who should be deported and what resources should be deployed for those purposes. And if we want to have a grown-up conversation about the border, we want to talk about expanded guest worker programs, we can talk about increased surveillance, we can talk about negotiations with foreign nations, Latin American nations in particular, to have a tighter border, to have less migration from those countries, to have stricter enforcement, and to have our workforce needs met in this country, and do something closer to what Ronald Reagan did in 1980, something closer to what George Bush as president tried to do when he tried to do it and was rejected by the Republicans. You want to talk like grown-ups about immigration? Let's do that. If you want to have a 1940 style impoundment of you want to have internment camps of migrants, that's going to be an ugly scene and a stain on American history.
It's kind of bizarre to think about, too, that all of this could be much more effectively addressed by, addressing those labor shortages that we have. How do we best address that? How do we maximize our productivity in this country? And on the other end, what can we do for our neighbors in the hemisphere to eliminate the situations that these people are running from? There are so many different, more diplomatic and really, in some ways, more grandiose ways, and really, should it work out, more heroic ways, more ways to come out looking like the hero in all of this without doing the ugly stuff that we're talking about here. So yeah,
and Chris, we've got an obligation. You're exactly right. I mean, our legacy towards Latin America is pretty poor, and our immigration policy towards Latin America for maybe the last 80 years has created conditions that resulted in this immigration spike. I do believe that politically we've had administration after administration mishandle migration and immigration, and it all blew up at once. But I don't think, I think we've seen the spike, and I don't think it's coming back. As I said, immigration has plummeted in the last year and a half under Biden when he did have a shift in policies. And I think there's a limited number of people who are willing to endure and risk what Latin American people have endured and risked to get here. And I think the cycle is down. I think the economic drivers are down. And I think the policies are in place that make it less attractive to try to come over. So it's not going to be a migration crisis anymore. It's a question of what to do with the people who are here, and how to handle the humanitarian, the law enforcement, and the economic factors associated with immigration.
Right. Well, here's hoping smarter and cooler minds prevail in that situation. Moving over to healthcare, and I'm sure you've noticed lately there's been this groundswell of widespread and largely bipartisan disapproval that's been voiced about the health insurance industry, specifically the for-profit health insurance industry. Texas is dead last in healthcare coverage overall. We've long neglected our lower income folks by refusing to accept expanded federal funding. Under Trump and Elon Musk and people like that, even that lifeline appears to be possibly in jeopardy. What do you see coming through the session and into the first part of the Trump administration for healthcare in Texas?
I'm mostly a dismal outlook, but I do think there's a few wild possibilities that could be positive. I've spent hundreds of hours, easily hundreds of hours, trying to get Texas to expand Medicaid. I've not been successful. It's the single most effective thing we can do. It's not the only thing we need to do, but we could pick up about 1 million people through a Medicaid expansion, and it's essentially free to the state government with no tax. And actually, it lowers employer health insurance premiums. I mean, I could spend an hour on Medicaid expansion. As much of a no-brainer as it is, despite the fact that Republican states throughout the nation have expanded Medicaid to their great benefit, I do not think it will happen in Texas next session. The line's been drawn. They're just not going there. It's stupid, but we're not going there. So
can you devil's advocate that for us? Can you tell us, step into their shoes for a second, why, especially considering the benefits that could be coming for young mothers and for children? They say that that's what they're all about. That's what the entire abortion ban thing is about. How can they say no to additional help in taking care of young families? What's their reasoning?
Well, and to add to that, there's a general recognition, bipartisan recognition about the need for mental health.
Sure.
In Medicaid expansion, I think nationwide, a third of newly enrolled people are availing of mental health benefits. So it's really consistent with everybody's objectives. The reasons it hasn't been expanded are almost exclusively political, with a few exceptions. All the old arguments, the devil's advocate would be, it's going to bankrupt Texas. That was said for years. Turns out all the economic analysis said it actually is financially, fiscally beneficial to the state. I mean, it's net revenue positive. We make money on this thing. It stabilizes family finances. It lowers divorce rates. It decreases emergency room utilization. Like I said, lowers health insurance premiums. There's not a good economic argument for it. As for it cultivating a sense of dependency, I mean, that's one argument that I at least can respect it when people make it seriously. They do not want to cultivate dependence of people being dependent on the state. I don't either. But we do have to recognize that in our healthcare system, people cannot afford healthcare. You can have all the transparency in the world in pricing. You can have insurance reform about these insurance companies and the hospitals and the doctors. You can make all the reforms that you want. A lot of people are not going to be able to afford it. So right now, they're already dependent. They're dependent on uncompensated care. They're dependent on charities giving them money. So that's true dependence. I want to give them health insurance. You want to give them health insurance so that they can take care of themselves and move into a position where they're better able to find work, where they can have employer-sponsored health insurance, et cetera, et cetera. So there isn't a good argument against it. It's essentially that we don't want to do that because we already said we don't like it. And we don't want to reverse positions on it. So here's the funny thing, though. Trump is insane. And I guess I'm not supposed to say things like that on the air, but I mean, I think he's nuts. And that's very dangerous and very bad in almost every respect. On the other hand, there are no rules governing Donald Trump. And I can imagine a world in which he says, you know what, I'm going to reform the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. And damn it, all of the recalcitrant states, you're going to sign up.
Yeah.
And suddenly Texas expands Medicaid under a new Trump vision. I don't think that's out of the question. It's not likely. It's not out of the question.
If there are, as you say, and I'm sure you're right, if there are significant, numbers of Republicans in the state house who are simply not going to back off on this because they've never backed off on it, having Donald Trump force their hand is actually kind of a get out of jail free card.
Exactly. Same thing for leadership. Same thing for the governor and lieutenant governor. In the meantime, Chris, we've got, as Democrats and even sincere Republicans, we've got to find some way to improve healthcare in this state. One of the things I'm trying to do is push non-medical drivers of health into the Medicaid system. We're essentially talking about wellness, cost avoidance factors, sickness avoidance factors, right? What are the things that make people sick in the first place? And can we put some money into making sure that people have nutrition, transportation to healthcare, and other environmental factors? There are things we can do. A couple sessions ago, I partnered up with a Republican in the House. We instituted a very arcane, confusing insurance reform that I had to hold on to it mentally myself. It was so complex. We essentially realigned the way ACA plans are priced, and it triggered bigger subsidies coming down. And we've had independent analysis say we got 350,000 people previously uninsured in Texas that now have health insurance. There are things we can do. Frustrated as we are with the bigger picture, we cannot give up the fight altogether. We cannot go, if Democrats, don't get the speaker they want, they may as well go sit in the gallery. No, nonsense.
Right. You're
not in the gallery. You're on the floor. You are figuring out ways to deliver for the people who put you here. That's our job.
Right. So Congressman Greg Casar in D.C. has been talking lately about the importance for Democrats to get past and cut past the culture war distractions that our opposition loves to throw at us, and to focus instead on the fact that a lot of what we're talking about, from immigration to healthcare, all these different issues, can also be seen through the prism of class, and that the fact that we're watching Donald Trump stack his cabinet with billionaires is evidence of how the lines in that battle are drawn at this point. In your view, how should everyday working Texans, regardless of their party, regardless of their political disposition, how should we all be viewing matters of the economy and opportunity?
I think we're going to see a gradual realization on the part of the everyday person that these merchant heroes that we've been clapping for while they make all these billions of dollars spend all their time thinking about how to get money from you. And we've been demonizing government, but when you think about it, the people who get elected have one job, and that is to help you have a better life. The people who make a ton of money have one job, and that is to get your money. right? I don't mean to paint them as evil. We all work at companies, right? We have to have a thriving, successful business sector. We do not have to have distorted markets. We do not have to have regulatory capture. We do not have to have monopolistic pricing. We do not have to have secrecy. We do not have to have consumers be fish in a barrel to giant corporations that are able to defy the history of antitrust law and at the same time finance manipulative methods in elections. And we're going to realize at some point that Elon Musk is not a savior. He's a villain. And so as for Kassar's comment, is this a class war? I'm hesitant. I mean, heck, all of us wish we had enough money to not worry about money, right? And there are plenty of wealthy elites who have good ideas. But I do think that the struggles of the average American have been left out of the dialogue and largely taken for granted. And I do think that there is this titan billionaire commercial class that thinks because they know how to succeed in the marketplace, they know how to run a government. I'm not going to hire these people to paint a picture or write a symphony or operate on my heart or give me a filling or decorate. I mean,
Right.
They know how to do what they know how to do. They don't know a goddamn thing about government. And to have people like Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk in there trying to reimagine government, guys, you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And the results are going to speak for themselves. They already do. So I think we have to point out that there are certain people who have your interests in mind. And then there are people who don't. And to that extent, I think Kassar is correct. Where I think that observation is wishful thinking is that the Republicans are not going to let us get away from the cultural wars. They're not going to step back and say, you know what, Democrats are tired of us attacking them on trans or border, so we'll just shut up about it. No, they're not gonna. They're going to come at us with these issues, and we are going to have to be able to handle that at the same time we are able to communicate to people that the U.S. oligarchs are not in their best interests, and that competent administration of the economy is really what Democrats do well.
Interesting times, as we say, for sure. Senator, as we wrap up, do you have any particular legislative priorities or goals that we haven't brought up yet that you'd like to highlight, stopping a bad bill or promoting a good one? Or you're so prolific in your work, what are you working on for this time?
I mean, honestly, Chris, the bad bill is just going to be, there's going to be a wave of them. So I'm just not going to anticipate all that right now on the podcast. I'd like to talk to people a little bit about things that do excite me, right? One of my nerdier pursuits is the grid. I do a lot of work on the grid. Sometimes it's bills, sometimes it's just being instrumental in how things are shaped and formed, or just asking questions in a committee hearing that lay bare stuff we have to know. But one of the things I'm working on is creating the regulatory framework for something called distributed energy resources. And to bring that home for people, we're talking about rooftop solar in many cases, that our grid was not designed to accommodate the technologies that are now available at the consumer level. So there's different things I want to do so that people can be part of generation, people can be active parts of conservation, and then also wrestling with the issues of data centers, artificial intelligence, onshoring, electrification of oil and gas, really working a lot in those spaces. Two other things I want to mention real quickly. Recycling is something that Texas has not been able to take on seriously. And I'm putting together a very serious coalition and a serious piece of legislation to reduce the amount of trash that gets into our streams and pollution in our water supplies and our playgrounds. Lastly, I have a very ambitious bill for workforce housing. We have a tremendous shortage of housing, and it is moving prices up from the lowest levels to all the way up to mid-tier levels. And I am going to try to structure a large economic mechanism to get housing going in Texas.
Very good. We'll follow all that for sure, and let us know how we can be of assistance in getting word out about what you're doing. That all sounds great. Last thing I'll ask you about here, the progressive side here in Texas. A great many of us, I think, people who are directly involved in politics have started to get over the shock of the election and start to focus on the fight ahead and the work that lies ahead, as you've talked about. But there are still plenty of folks out there who are experiencing some apprehension and some fear about what's coming, and not only in Texas but nationally as Trump 2.0 begins. Do you have some words of encouragement that you might share with people who are a little bit worried about what's coming up?
The encouragement I can give you is that if you ever thought that your voice was relevant, now's your time. It's not an especially encouraging message, except that you are relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And we are for all my optimism that I try to carry around with me, I also fear that we could be sliding into one of the dark times of history. And there are dark times in history. Not every cycle is the same as every other. And we are on the precipice. I do think that with enough people participating earnestly and sincerely and productively, I think we can reverse it. And I think we're close to the bottom. But I don't take it for granted. And so what I want to ask people is, don't you take it for granted either. We haven't bottomed out. There, as some people would say, there is no bottom until we put one in there and cause the ricochet. So the optimistic thing is I think we'll have reasons for some solidarity on the progressive side that I think has been lacking in the last several years. And I look forward to people who care about our future working together. And I ask everybody to have that in their hearts and in their minds as we launch into these next 4 years, because they're going to be hard.
Right. We absolutely do need to unite. Dallas Senator Nathan Johnson, we appreciate you joining us very much and look forward to following your adventures in the session.
So grateful to be here, Chris. Thank you.
Very, very good. Here at Progress Texas, we're in the business, as we've talked about, of countering the conservative disinformation machine that's largely responsible for the election of Donald Trump and the mess we're in here. But while that machine is funded by oil billionaires and tech billionaires and religious right-wing groups and more, we rely mostly on everyday Texans who value our work and share our belief that a Texas that works for everybody is the Texas we want to live in. So we don't do subscriptions, we don't do paywalls, because we believe the message of progress is one that everyone should be able to access, learn from, and act upon. So if you become a regular listener, we appreciate it and we could use your support. No amount is too small. Thanks to our friends Kristen Hartwell, Laura Wildenthal, and Doug Beaton, all of whom have joined the team lately. We also want to thank our friends who have pitched in for our fundraising holiday parties for 2024, one of whom is the Honorable Nathan Johnson. Thank you, Senator, for your help. Also, the Honorable Joaquin Castro, Sarah Eckhart, and Cheryl Cole, Austin Kaplan, the Kaplan Law Firm, and so many of our other great friends for their valued and ongoing support. Go to progresstexas.org/donate. And thank you for listening and for all you do to press progress forward here in the Lone Star State. We'll catch you next time.